Hey, with you evening story channel, I post new interesting stories every day. Subscribe and click the bell to not miss it.
Before this cannot be allowed, said Jacob, and without taking his eyes off the screen of the phone, collapsed into a chair. The cat with indignant, and you jumped out from under the master? Get off. Here's the thing. He brought the phone closer to his eyes, then forth and zoomed in on the picture. The cat turned away disappointedly. In general, he never took offense at his master seriously, but it was necessary to express resentment. Jacob picked up his tiny, freezing, and deathly defensive creature, went out, and left him at home. The pet considered himself lucky, and only one thing prevented happiness from becoming boundless. The coloring of his fur exactly repeated the colors of the owner's chair, and that was a shame. Jacob had already pressed the phone to his ear and listened to the long beeps. He knew that his grandmother was probably still awake, but she could forget the foam in the kitchen and not hear the call. Listening reported cheerfully into the phone Grandma and Jacob, once again amazed at how young her voice is. "Grandma, it's me, Jacob. What's wrong?" "I'm fine, Jacob." "Why?" "Then why did you put up for sale a teapot, a silver cup and saucer, and a pendant?" "Granny, do you need money? Why didn't you call me?" There was such a deafening silence on the phone. What did he do? Did he think the connection was broken? "Granny, Jacob," Granny's voice became guilty, as if she had just been caught in a crime. "I haven't had a kettle or anything for 15 years. I didn't want to tell you. My good, Lucy. What's she got to do with it?" Jacob was surprised. Why would his ex-wife bring up his grandmother? "The day Lucy left you, she came with Maria to say goodbye to me. She told me a lot of unpleasant things about you, Jacob, and don't ask me to remember what they were. I didn't even pay attention. It's never easy to break up, especially for women. But after she left, all those things disappeared, and you didn't say anything." "Why, Grandma?" "Because she sighed. Because you were in enough pain. Why add fuel to the fire? After all, they're just trinkets. Maybe the daughter needs them more than trinkets." This coming from a woman living on a pension that's impossible to survive on. Jacob and his brother take turns visiting the grandmother, bringing her huge bags of groceries once a week. But apparently, generosity of soul has nothing to do with money. "You're my saint," he said affectionately. "All right, go to bed. I'll call you tomorrow." So Lucy, he hadn't heard that name in 15 years, and had even accustomed himself to the idea that there had never been a wife or daughter in his life. And anyway, it was all a dream, dreamed by the 20-year-old brat he'd once been. They got married early, barely made it to their 18th birthday. But did they? That's debatable. Because by the day of his parents' wedding, Maria was already actively pushing in his mom's belly. And 2 months later, she begged for the light. "Maria," Jacob wrinkled his nose, like stretches of pain. His daughter, his sweet cheeks, blonde curls, bottomless eyes. He'd never seen eyes like those in anyone's life ever. The warmth of her body. When she fell asleep right on her daddy's lap, Maria was still in the tapes. Jacob already dreamed how she would grow up, and then they would surely walk in the park. She would squeal with joy when she would see the live ponies ride on all the rides, and then he would buy her an ice cream and a milkshake. With those memories, a wave of burning resentment toward his wife rose up and swept over his soul again. How dare she decide for everyone? One day she took the child away, and she was the only one they saw. How long he tried to find them afterwards. And now it turns out that Lucy also stole from his grandmother all these things, which so untimely caught his. Grandma said it was still in the war. On holidays, Grandma cleaned this kettle so that it began to shine and would be like a new one. If it were not for these 2 marks, scratches on the bulge, on the side, and the wide handle. No, it's not just any similar pot. This is my grandmother's teapot, right to the cellar. Its tab glowed blue at the very end of the utensil description. Jacob quickly typed a short message. "I am interested in the silver teapot, tea pair, and ruby pendant. Ready to pick up at any convenient time." The answer came instantly. "Meet me tomorrow at 6:00 p.m. at the cafe. Sincerely, Lucy." The cat jumped on his master's lap and rubbed his head affectionately. On his sleeve, I guess he was tired of being offended. "See, what's the matter?" mumbled Jacob, and scratched behind the ear of the pet. "I'd just like to see how she's doing, and buy back the things. Let Grandma be happy." What do you think? The cat curled up in a cozy ball. Actually, his name was Romeo, but for some reason his master often substituted his romantic name for his vulgar name. Strange people. Lita, he noticed from afar. She quickly ran across the road from the bus stop to the cafe. She looked great, slim figure, fashionable haircut, and in the movements of all the same girlish ease. Such women always have an army of sighs, and it's no wonder. She entered the hall and looked around, clearly was here for the first time. I wonder then why she chose unfamiliar places to meet a customer. Jacob stood up and waved to her from his seat. Lucy, I didn't get to call her Lucy here for some reason. She may have been his wife, but when was that? Jacob, so it was you? Were you tracking us? If I was looking to meet you, then calm down, he smiled. No one was tracking anyone. It's all purely coincidental, and I really want to buy from you. But first, tell me how Maria is. At the mention of her daughter, Lucy's smile brightened as she relaxed a little. She's all grown up now. She turned 14 in February. I know, she nodded. Yes, 14. Jacob, I want to. You already know I got all these from your grandmother, right? So you'd think I stole them. Don't bring that up, I asked him. I do. She lightly slapped and palmed the ladder, snoozing at the counter. The waiter immediately woke up and ran over to their table. I'll have a tea with lemon, please, about a lady. Lucy, what should I order you? Just a glass of water and nothing else. Jacob, listen to me. All these things once belonged to my family. He raised his eyebrows. Lucy hurriedly continued. My great-grandfather was a rich man. He had a huge estate, not far from. Never mind. It was burned down anyway. My great-grandfather, my great-grandmother, and their 2 daughters huddled in this half-burned house. It was a cold winter. They looked for anything that had survived the fire. Everything that could burn and give at least a little heat. Books, furniture. When the soldiers came, it was bad for everyone. They told me later that expensive rosewood furniture was stacked by the fireplace, and jewelry was exchanged for food, gold, diamonds for a piece of bread, a handful of flour. Can you imagine that? Neither can I. It's a horrible fairy tale to me, but it was their reality. I don't know what they were counting on. They probably didn't know it themselves. They just went to bed every night, glad they were alive. And in the morning, they didn't know if they'd make it through the night. And then, when there was almost nothing left in the house, some band of looters showed up. They called themselves the Reds, but they were just ordinary looters. These vultures took the last copper teapot, a pendant, my great-grandfather's wedding present to his wife, and a cup and saucer of pure silver. In fact, she was silent. They had doomed the whole family to starvation. Then grandmother decided they needed to leave the house immediately and head for the city, if only on foot. It was still survivable. We had to walk. It was too dangerous to go through the woods on the road. And in the woods, there was shooting every now and then. Only great-grandmother and her daughters made it to town. Great-grandfather, just a strayed bullet ricocheted into his forehead. A trunk, a tree, and that was it. The only man in the family was gone, and one of the girls froze and caught a cold. So she was saved only by a miracle. Kind people helped, sheltered her, let her lie down in their house, even found some medicine. But it was all just an accident. They might not have met them or helped them. I've been told that since I was a kid, you know. And then I saw it all at your grandmother's, and I decided we couldn't live together. That from surprise, Jacob almost let out of his hands a cup of tea entertained on the table. The waiter at the counter was dozing again, and Jacob waved his napkin. I love you, Jacob. Just said Lucy loved you very much and was going to live with you for the rest of my life. But everything changed in one single day. I noticed that, he muttered. She gestured for him not to interrupt. That's when you were stuck at work and Grandma needed to drop off her medication. Do you remember when you called? Asked me to go to her house? I took Maria with me and took a cab. Your grandmother offered me tea, and that's when she showed me all this. A teapot and everything. And I, Jacob, looked at it and thought, that's your great-grandfather. Robbed my family, robbed them and left them to die of hunger and cold in the winter. I realized I couldn't live with you anymore. The next day, I waited for you to leave. I packed quickly. You don't have to tell me the rest, he sighed. So it turns out, it was our ancestors who quarreled, and we're the ones to clean up the mess. Lucy looked up at him with huge eyes full of tears. I'm sorry about that. Jacob, I really am. I decided to sell it all so I don't have to remember it anymore. It's hard. What is this memory of robbery and survival and my family falling apart? She drummed her guesses relentlessly on the table. Jacob gently covered the woman's palm with his own. I didn't think I'd ever say this, he confessed. But I understand and sympathize with you. You've been through a nightmare. Yes, Lucy, no longer hiding, cried. Tears ran down her cheeks and dripped into the water in her glass. Here, take this. He held out a napkin to her. I have a favor to ask of you. Lucy, let's go to my grandmother's house together. You can tell me everything yourself. She's been around a long time. I want her to, when the time comes. I don't want her to leave us thinking she's been robbed. Will you help me? Yes. She wiped her tears. And then she said it again. Yeah, sure. Let's go right now, Lucy. Grandma gasped, confused, but quickly pulled herself together. How glad I am that you came. You look so beautiful. Tell me, how was ours, Grandma? Jacob shook his wife's hand firmly. Lucy, I wanted to tell you something. Let's sit down. She listened without interrupting. Jacob, at first, even surprised that his always hospitable grandmother did not even offer tea to Lita, but then realized it is impossible to pour tea to a person who tells you such things. Lucy had already finished her story, and tears stood in her eyes again. Grandma patted her on the shoulder. I didn't think to tell you the whole story, Lucy, she sighed. It never occurred to me, you know. The thing is, honey, my father didn't rob your family, even though he knew the thief. How so? Very briefly, replied Grandma. But perhaps it's best to start the whole story from the beginning, from that very winter. It was a frightful time, much scarier than one can imagine. The cold seemed to be everywhere, but we were afraid to go into the woods and chop wood. They were always shooting there, and you could get into trouble on the way. There were gangs of bandits yelling everywhere. It was better not to get caught by them. We ate permafrost potatoes and that was it. Then we ran out of potatoes, and for 2 days we sat hungry and cold, but we were afraid to stick our noses out of the door. I could hear my mother quietly telling my father to stay at home. She said that if he was killed, we would all come to an imminent end. What could a woman with children do in those days? How could she defend herself? Where to get food for all of us? Papa listened to her, but a day passed, and then another, and it became clear that if we continued to be afraid, we would only have to wait for death. Then Dad said he would go to the forest and try to shoot at least a bird or an animal. Mom was crying with fear, and we children were crying too. And Dad took the gun and, without looking back, went out the door. It was unbearable for him to sit idly by and see us hungry. I remember how we watched him from the window and mentally said goodbye to my father forever. He came home late and told us everything that had happened to him. Dad noticed the bloody footprints in the snow and followed them. He thought that the one who left them was still alive and could be helped. The trail led him to the wounded man, and there was no way to help him. He was living out the last minutes of his life. This wounded man turned out to be a marauder who had fallen behind. They had been to a half-burned manor, not far away, but there was nothing to eat there, and the owner had fired a shotgun at them. About the grandfather, whispered Lucy. After all, it was him. Grandmother nodded. It is quite likely that it was your great-grandfather. Dear marauders, passed away almost immediately. Dad turned his sack over and found in them a teapot, a pendant, and a silver teapot. Dad was an honest man. He went to that homestead to return the owners their goods, but he found no one in the house. The owners were gone. There was no one to return it to. Father turned back, and on the way he had the luck of the hunt. He killed a moose. In those days, that was unheard of luck. Meat meant food for everyone, which meant life itself. The moose, Dad told us, came to the hunter himself. He was very weak, barely able to stand on his feet. The animal was already carrying several bullets. Apparently, the random ones were hardly aimed at him on purpose. But, as I said, in those days there were shots going off in the woods all the time. My father didn't have to shoot. He went with one hunting knife, and we were saved from starvation. And the things that could not be brought back remained in the family. That's the whole story. Lucy, and I wish I'd told it sooner. Maybe then you wouldn't have left Jacob. Lucy shook her head. I'm the one who wishes I'd thought to ask where you got all this from. It was like blood rushed to my head. I stopped thinking. No one. Grandma smiled, and she doesn't blame you. You were just a young girl, and youth has a tendency to rush into things without blaming itself. Sweet Grandma's right. Jacob sat closer to his wife and hugged her tightly by the shoulders. When you are young, it is not unreasonable to make a mess of things. The main thing is that at least now sorted out. Maria looks like herself, Lucy said. Like you, she loves antique things. She's got half a room full of them. However, buys mostly just stylization. She's not making any money for the real thing yet, and she wants to go into programming. Doesn't that remind you of anyone? Jacob laughed. What can you do? Pigs don't make oranges. Can I see her Lucy sometime? I was wondering what she's like now. You'll see, my wife promised. Let her get away from her pet first. You know, she brought a nightmare cat into the house. I thought he wouldn't make it. But Maria got him out of the soap, fed him. Now he won't let go of my hands. And I have a cat with about the same story. But yours probably isn't named Romeo. Who told you? Jacob was confused and immediately laughed. Maria is Maria. You know, he said. I was so excited to go for a ride with her. There's ice cream on the carousel. Lucy took her husband under her arm, and now it's not too late, she smiled. Would you know how much she loves it? The evening sky was getting darker, and here and there bright summer stars lit up the sky. Lucy dared to ask Jacob, tell me, are you? Maria has a stepfather. No. The wife replied nonchalantly. I wasn't looking for one. Here's our house. Look, she pointed up there to our windows. There's a couple sleeping on the 4th floor. Let's turn off the lights. Lucy turned to face her husband. Thanks for walking me home. Thanks for everything. I'll call tomorrow, Jacob suggested. Suddenly he felt afraid of her answer, that if she refused, she would say something like thank you for everything. But now we'd better get on with our lives. He almost had time to regret his question, but Lucy laughed and nodded. See you tomorrow, she whispered and ran into the entryway.